Hello, everyone. I'm Tigray, and I'm here today to reflect on the statement issued today by the Ethiopian regime about what it calls a humanitarian truce in Tigray. And I thought it's worth reflecting upon, not because I believe that the regime issued the statement in good faith, or that I think anything good will come out of it. I think there is no reason to believe that anything good will happen. But because I think the statement has a potential to mislead and gaslight a lot of people in the international community. And I could already see signs that that is happening. People of important positions and influence have kind of already run with the story now, and they are in celebratory mood already, saying that the Ethiopian regime has kind of succumbed to negotiation and to opening corridors and to playing a constructive role in delivering aid to a desperate Tigray. And I don't think any of that will happen. And I don't think the real rational intention of the statement is for the regime to tell us that it has a change in direction and policy when it comes to Tigray. I think its policy of starvation of Tigray will continue. And the actual reason that it issued the statement today is to avoid the sanctions that are being lined up against the regime. But before I come to why I think the statement was issued today, I thought I would give you a bit of context first about the statement, about what the core message in the statement is. So it says that the regime has decided to enact a humanitarian truce in Tigray. And one is, you have to ask, what does it mean and why? Because we know that the main reason aid wasn't getting into Tigray wasn't because there was a fight in Tigray or because there were warring parties inside Tigray, but because forces affiliated with the regime and, in my opinion, under the command of the regime, have been obstructing aid. We know what the Afar forces have been doing on the via the Abiy route to Tigray from Samarra to Abiy. The regime would say that it has given clearance to a convoy, and then there would be an attack. We don't know whether the attack is real or imaginary, and then the convoy turns around. That was the pattern that has been playing, right? And the same applies to the route across Amhara and all the other routes. And we know that there are about 50 routes that lead to Tigray have been totally blocked by the government. So the main reason why aid hasn't been getting to Tigray wasn't because of fighting in Tigray, as the statement seems to imply, but because forces aligned with the regime have decided to obstruct aid. So saying that the regime has enacted a unilateral truce doesn't really make sense. With whom? What would have made real sense if the regime told us that it's going to rein in on the forces that have been obstructing aid, on the Afar forces, on the Amhara forces, but it doesn't say that. So on the face of it, the statement, the core point in the statement doesn't really make sense. But even if we were to believe that the real reason aid wasn't getting into Tigray was because of the fight between Tigray forces and the federal forces, a unilateral truce won't cut it, because for something to really work, it has to be agreed between the two forces. And what the regime is saying is not an agreement. It doesn't say that they have engaged the Tigray forces, or that they have had discussions, and that they have arrived at a mechanism of ensuring that aid gets into Tigray. What the regime is saying, that telling us, is that it has declared a unilateral ceasefire, and so it makes it easier for the regime to give excuses tomorrow. For instance, it's going to say, well, I'm trying my best, I'm trying to send convoys and aid into Tigray, but the Tigray forces opening fire against the convoy or against our forces, and so we have been forced to halt operations. That's what they will say, because there is no agreement. We don't know the mechanism of how it's going to be implemented. There is no way of making sure that independent parties could verify and check who is doing what. It's very, very vague, and it's designed to give the regime an excuse to continue saying that it's trying to deliver aid without actually delivering aid. And interestingly, in the statement, they say that the Tigray forces, who they don't call by name because now they have been kind of advised to refrain from using inflammatory terms like junta and stuff, and because they can't call it the Tigray government, because if they did that, there would be a huge backlash from different Ethiopian kind of political communities. So now the Tigray government doesn't have a name according to the Ethiopian regime, so they call it the other side. But they say that the other side has to reciprocate this favor by withdrawing its forces from neighboring regions, apparently from Afar. The statement doesn't mention, but I think they mean Afar. Now, that's a fair demand if indeed the Tigray forces are in Afar, but they don't say that they are going to withdraw their forces from Western Tigray. Amhara forces, Ethiopian forces, and Eritrean forces are still occupying Western Tigray, right? So, if this is a fair game, what should happen is that the federal government, the federal forces, and especially Eritrean forces who are continuing to cause havoc in Western Tigray must withdraw. All Amhara forces who are murdering people in Western Tigray must withdraw, and then, only then, can you demand the Tigray forces also to withdraw. Because the reason Tigray forces are in those areas, wherever they are, is because they are trying their best to open corridors at the last resort, because the regime wouldn't on its own volition. So it doesn't make sense for the regime now to say the Tigray forces must withdraw without giving them guarantees that, number one, it's not going to attack, and number two, it's going to deliver aid. So those are legitimate questions that anybody should ask. But more than that, I think the fundamental question that we should ask is if the regime really has the best interest of the Tigray people at heart, right? There are a couple of things that it could do now with just stroke of the pen. Number one, open banks in Tigray. Number two, open electricity in Tigray. Number three, resume all the other services in Tigray, pay salaries in Tigray. If the regime did that today, it doesn't need to go out of its way to do anything. It's just a matter of pressing a switch. So they could do that, but they go on in the statement how sympathetic they are to the suffering in Tigray, how they are trying to help Tigrayans and everything. But they could do those things if they really mean what they say in the statement. But of course, they don't mean what they say in the statement. I think that the policy of starvation is the main policy still of the regime when it comes to Tigray. I think they still believe that the way to subjugate and force Tigrayans into submission is by continuing the blockade, and the cruel belief is that if the status quo continues for long enough, ultimately Tigrayans are going to give in to that. Because there is only so much that people could endure, right? And Tigrayans have suffered so much. So that's what's happening, and serious people who really want to help Tigrayans, who really want to facilitate aid and stuff, should ask serious questions of the regime. They should ask, what do you mean when you say humanitarian truce? How is it going to be executed and implemented? Do we have a mechanism of ensuring it? How is it different from before when, for instance, I think it was in June, when the federal forces had been routed out from Tigray. The next day, the Prime Minister said that a unilateral ceasefire has been declared. But we know what that turned out to be, right? That was a code word for the total blockade that has ravaged Tigray. And there is no reason to believe that the truce that they have declared today is any different from ceasefire, because ultimately they are the same words. Slight difference. I think it was Mulugeta Gebrehot who has written in detail about what these terms mean, how they are different, but essentially they are the same: truce and ceasefire. But the regime is just playing a game with the international community by changing words, by tweaking one thing here and another thing, that without changing the fundamental reality. The fundamental reality remains that Tigray has been totally blockaded, and there is no reason to believe that that will change. And serious people, journalists, diplomats, must ask of the regime how is it that it's going to be different this time around. So I just want to say those things because I observe a degree of naivete in the international community in just running away with whatever story is being fed to them by the regime, even though they have a mountain of evidence to believe that this is a perfidious force regime that shouldn't be trusted on anything serious. So that was my message, and that's why I thought reflecting on it today would be important. And I'm done. Thank you for bearing with me, and have a good time. Bye bye.